appears we've got a critical mass of people. Obviously, people can join in as they come, but welcome everybody to this Netcapital live Q&A with Chris Sauer of ORPC. Chris, thanks for taking the time to be here. The way this will work is I'll be emceeing. I'll ask questions of Chris around ORPC and their business and the investment opportunity. At any time, if any caller or attendee has any questions, please feel free to use the Q&A function and ask a question. I'll do my best to get to everyone's question. We'll try and put them generally in order so that everything can make sense. But definitely, this is your time as attendees to ask questions of Chris. So with that, Chris, welcome. Thanks for being here.
Well, thank you. This is a pleasure, and I appreciate the opportunity to meet over the internet with potential investors. We think we have a great value proposition and a great story, and look forward to addressing your questions.
Great. Well, with that, why don't we kick it off with, Chris, why don't you give us a brief overview of ORPC?
Sure. In a nutshell, ORPC is in the business of improving people's lives and their environment through sustainable energy solutions. And the way we do that is through our proprietary marine renewable energy power systems, both for river, tidal, and then ultimately with offshore ocean currents. We combine our systems with microgrid technology, advanced microgrid technology and energy storage. And in our current initial market, which is remote communities, initially focused in North America, what we can offer them essentially is transitioning them from being reliant on very expensive, dirty, noisy, environmentally risky diesel, convert that to a no carbon advanced microgrid. So it's transformational for these communities, not only in terms of their energy future, but the whole socio-economic part of it, where we create local economic development. We provide no carbon electricity at reasonable prices, and it really goes to the whole socio-economic benefit that we bring to the community. We've been at this 14 and a half years. I guess it's a little embarrassing to say we're a 14-and-a-half-year-old startup, but you know, when you're creating new technology in an industry that didn't exist, so you're a startup company in the startup industry, it takes a little longer, but we've made incredible strides. We have to date raised over $90 million of capital. Over 50 million of that has been private capital, and honestly, from family offices, from individuals who shared our vision. So I suspect it's from people like you that have an interest in not only making a return, but also in doing something good along the way. We're at the point now where just yesterday here in Maine, we had the official launch of our first commercial product, the RivGen power system. This is a system that's going to be installed in a remote community in Alaska this summer. We have now reached to the point where we have turned our research and development in the river system into a commercial product. A year from now, we'll be there with our tidal project, so we are right on the cusp of breaking into the market in a big way in terms of signing up customers and starting to deliver on our mission of improving people's lives and their environment.
Great, Chris. Thanks for the overview. Real quick, short question. What does ORPC stand for?
Ocean, well, originally we adopted the name Ocean Renewable Power Company. And originally we were an LLC. We converted about 3 years ago to, actually 2 years ago, to a corporate structure. And since we have such a big emphasis on rivers now, we thought it was easier to just go by ORPC Inc. There's been a suggestion that instead of Ocean Renewable Power Company, we call it Ocean River Power Company. But we decided that the short name actually served us a little better. It's a little easier to remember.
Yeah, it's a little easier to get through.
Yeah.
Well, great. So you're building a product. You've got big goals. Talk to me a little bit about the team behind those goals. Can you talk to me about your team, where they come from, and what their abilities are, and why you think they're going to be the ones that really bring you guys to the next level?
Yeah, well, the amazing team that we've been able to assemble is actually, we have great technology, but I have to tell you, the thing that really the sizzle in what we do is in the team. When you're doing new technology and you're entering a market that actually didn't exist before, obviously you need people that have a lot of creativity, but they have to have a lot of expertise, not just be creative. So it's got to be based in science and based in relationships. So if you look across our team, myself, I came from a background, my whole career has been in the electricity business. I started in the early 1980s developing cogeneration facilities. I did several cogeneration facilities, independent power projects. I did a wind project. So in my career, I've done over $2 billion worth of either energy assets or companies. And I've been very fortunate in attracting people to our team that have the type of diverse backgrounds that you need. So we have ocean engineers, we have mechanical engineers, we have people who specialize in the regulatory process. We have people that are great in terms of getting our message out. We've benefited greatly from a lot of very good press over the years. We have a financial CFO who's just extremely talented, has an amazing team under her that keeps everything straight. So it's a matter of finding people, first of all, with the right philosophy about doing business, total commitment to teamwork. We like to say you leave I at the door here. It's all about we, and we work very well as a team. One of our founding principles is that we work on a collaborative basis. We look at, as an example, regulatory agencies are not our enemy, they're our friends. They just don't know it at first. And that has served us very well because we are very open and honest with everyone, with the communities we serve. We've developed great relationships there. So having that basic belief as a person is the most fundamental thing we look for when we're looking for people to bring on our team. And then we look for the expertise we need. So you can't really go out and find somebody that has an engineering degree, especially an advanced engineering degree in tidal energy or river energy. So we find mechanical engineers who know how to adapt their expertise to our specific applications. The same with ocean engineers or electrical engineers. And so we've melded that into a team that most of them are here in Portland, but we have team members in Canada and other areas of the U.S. and in Ireland as well, and they gel very well as a team because of our collective belief in teamwork. And we've accomplished some pretty amazing things as a team.
Great. And so bringing it back to the product itself, you have some pretty big ambitions. Talk to me about the big problem that you're trying to tackle, trying to solve.
Yeah, I'd like to kind of address this in two ways. From the highest level, there's pretty much an insatiable appetite around the world for renewable energy. And the fact of the matter is, solar and wind are not the best answer everywhere. And there are some, now we love solar and wind, don't get us wrong, but there are some issues that they encounter in terms of viewshed issues, weather conditions. So we believe that in order for the world to become, if not exclusively, predominantly powered by renewable energy, that marine renewable energy is going to be a big part of that because we have advantages over wind and solar. Our systems are completely submerged. You don't see a thing, you don't hear a thing, you don't even know they're there. And the other great advantage we have is that the output from our systems is totally predictable. It's predictable and reliable. So there's an opportunity worldwide. There's a huge part of the energy market worldwide that we believe will be filled by marine renewable energy. And as a leader in this field, we really feel like very strongly that we will capture a huge part of that market. So that's at the very highest level. We have, because we're a new technology, I probably shouldn't admit this, but we're not competitive with natural gas in the US. We can't yet produce power at 5 cents a kilowatt hour, someday, but not now. So many years ago, we decided that we needed to find the markets that were the highest cost markets. And those exist throughout the world. And these are, there are essentially 2 billion people in the world that live in remote off-grid communities. They either have no power at all, or they are powered by very expensive diesel. And so of the 2 billion, about 700 million of them, in fact, are powered by diesel. They pay very high costs. And where we are today in terms of our cost structure of our power systems, we can reduce the cost in that market. So we have initially focused on remote communities in North America. There's over 300 of them. You know, there's kind of a misunderstanding about remote communities. Sometimes when I talk to people, they'll say, well, what is there, like 5 or 10 of them in the world? It's not true. There's hundreds of them, and over 300 of them are in North America. It's a significant market. It's a market that is looking for sustainable energy solutions because they're tired of diesel. It's too expensive. It prohibits economic development. And most of these communities are indigenous communities with very strong tie to their environment. They have a centuries-old tradition of protecting their environment. So what we are offering them is something that's very attractive, not just in terms of the energy side, but from the environmental side and from the economic social impact side as well. So we are immediately addressing that need in remote communities, initially in North America, and then throughout the world.
Great, and that leads me right into my next question. I was going to ask you about the market size, and so you started to talk about that. Can we talk a little bit more about how big the market is? Both.
Sure, and I'm going to use my cheat sheet a little bit here because there's a bunch of numbers, but and it's timely because last year, at the end of the year, we completed a very extensive market analysis, a global market analysis. And I'll preface this by saying the numbers I'm going to be giving you are numbers that in areas that we know. We have some information. We feel comfortable enough addressing the numbers because there is some basis for it. But there's a lot of areas of the world where honestly we know that there is a market, but we just don't have any information. As an example, Indonesia would be one of those markets where we know that there are tremendous resources there. There's just nothing reliable in terms of markets. So with that said, we have estimated the total addressable market, global market, is 433 gigawatts, so 433,000 megawatts. So that's kind of the first cut, and that's looking at it from a resource standpoint. And then if you say, okay, those resources exist, but how many of them is it really practical to extract energy? It's still a very big market. It's over 100 gigawatts, 103 gigawatts. And then if you add another lens to that and you say, okay, if you can extract 103 gigawatts and you look at each specific location and match that with the actual energy market in that location, because in some areas you have tremendous resources, they exceed the actual market that you would be delivering to. So we've put that into the analysis, and we arrive at, today, the addressable market is 46 gigawatts. So 46,000 megawatts, that's what we're looking at today. And if you run that through our numbers, the 46 gigawatt market represents the potential for almost $500 billion in revenue to ORPC. I could break it down further if you're interested. We can talk about how the 46 gigawatts, you know, what are the price points, et cetera, where those biggest markets are, but not surprisingly, they're Europe, North America, South America, and Asia. Honestly, the least information we have is on Asia and Southeast Asia, so those we consider not quite reliable.
Well, I think that's a good overview. And of course, this is a great reminder. Anyone who's on the call, if there's any details you'd like Chris to get into or any specific questions you have, definitely feel free to use the Q&A function and ask your questions, and we'll try and get to them as quickly as we can. But on that note, so you talked about this big market. Talk to me about the progress so far. You mentioned earlier your RivGen launch, but talk to me about what kind of the last 14 years of ORPC have looked like.
We've been busy.
Yeah.
You know, it's kind of funny. We're kind of the classic startup company story. It started, myself and two colleagues came up with this idea in the summer of 2004, and I'm the only one of the three that actually stayed active in the company. I drew the short straw, so I had to do it. And you know, the first task was figuring out what's the appropriate technology. So we were very lucky. We developed a great relationship with the U.S. Navy. They have a group called the Naval Surface Warfare Center Carteret Division, which is a group of about 5,000 scientists and engineers stationed around the world, that most of them civilians, but that are responsible for everything the Navy has in the water. And we did a cooperative research and development agreement with them, where they helped us develop the basic design concept. So the concept was that was developed is using cross-flow turbines, which is different than anybody else had really thought of. But we came into this really agnostic. We didn't care. We didn't know where we were going. We just wanted to find what we thought was the best solution. So we came up with multiple cross-flow turbines on a single shaft with an underwater generator, no gears, because gears are just inviting problems. So it's a direct drive unit. It's a one moving part. The turbines and the shaft and the rotor of the generator are all just one big moving part. So it's very simple mechanically. And that was the recommendation that we came up with the Navy. And then from there, once we realized that this technology we've come up with, two big things that came out of that. One is that with cross-flow turbines, it doesn't matter whether the water is coming or going and reversing tidal currents, they always turn in the same direction. So it meant that we could address tidal currents without having to do any kind of mechanical repositioning, which is a huge advantage. And second of all, our design is kind of very wide and not very high, so we have a very low vertical profile, and that's ideal for river applications. So we then started to look seriously at, okay, where are the best tidal and river resources in America, because we're a U.S. company, that's where we started, and that led us to Maine and Alaska. And so we began a series, so we decided that Maine would be our testing grounds. We have a great site in Down East Maine. It's right on the Canadian border at the mouth of the Bay of Fundy. And so we have been through a series of R&D projects, which led to demonstration projects. In 2012, as an example, we installed our first full-scale tidal system in Copperbrook Bay, Maine, in Down East Maine. And it was the first ocean energy project of any type to deliver power to a grid. So we were the first in the Americas, and that includes wind, wave, whatever. We were the first one to deliver energy to a utility grid from an ocean energy project. And along with that, we were developing the river version of our technology called RivGen Power System. And we did a couple of demonstration projects in our community that we deal with in Alaska, Igiagig. That was in 2014 and 2015. Those were very, very successful projects. So we've been through all the way through the R&D, the demonstration project phase. We spent the last 3.5 or 4 years taking all of that knowledge and turning it into a commercially viable design. The first projects worked great, but we had two problems. They weren't as reliable as they needed to be, and they were too expensive. So we have worked on that. and we have advanced our technology significantly since then. The RivGen power system that we had the official launch ceremony yesterday is really amazing, the improvements versus the first one. It's now a commercial product, and we're doing it with our TiGen system that will be following us in a year. But along the way, we had to raise a lot of money. So fortunately, we have been very successful in applying for and securing government grants and development loans. There's about $41 or $42 million of government money that we've been able to secure on a highly competitive basis. We have a success rate in grants that's kind of crazy. It approaches 70%. We're very focused in our efforts to secure that money because it's much needed. And then we've been able to match that with private investment, which has been the secret of our success. So it's led us to a point now where we're ready to go into the market with our first commercial product, and we're getting very close to the point of achieving profitability within 3 years. But we need growth capital in order to get over that final step.
Great. And as you make the next step and start deploying these units, can you talk to me about what your planned business model is?
Yeah, it's a pretty simple model, really. We don't ever intend to be a manufacturer, and there's good reason for that, because the components that make up our systems are pretty diverse. You're talking about turbines that are made out of very highly engineered, high-end composite materials, and that's a whole different expertise than, say, a underwater permanent magnet generator. There's bearings, and there's a lot of other things that come into this. So we never want to be a manufacturer. We manage the supply chain. So I like to kid and say we're just like Apple. You know, Apple doesn't make the iPhone; they just manage the supply chain. So that's our approach to it. So supply chain management, by the way, is one of those areas that, assuming success with this raise, we need to be adding capabilities in that area, because we're now going to get into much bigger production units rather than one-offs. So it's an important area for us. So we make a profit margin above the cost. That's a big part of our revenue. And also closely associated with that, since this is a new technology, these are new power systems, there is unique expertise involved with designing a project, managing the project, installing the project. We provide services that go along with our systems, and that's important. As an example, this first project we're doing, a commercial project in Igiaga that will go in this summer, they have basically hired us to not only provide the power system, but provide the development services. So we actually have secured the FERC license for them. We know how to apply for the appropriate regulatory process. We've been able to do the site assessment, et cetera. So that comes along with the supply of the system. So those are basically the two biggest revenue streams, come from the margin on sales and then the sale of services. We also see ourselves eventually getting into licensing agreements, and we think that in Asia, that's probably the right approach to the market there, where there will be licensing agreements. We'll make money off of that. And then on a selected basis, we will be investing in projects. Some of that will be putting in our development services as sweat equity, so we get a percentage of the revenues from the project. So both of those, the licensing and the investment in projects, are much lesser part of our revenue stream. It's mostly from margin and from services.
Great. And so we have an investor question, and they asked, water, especially seawater, can be corrosive to most metals, and how are you mitigating this issue with your systems?
Yeah, it's a major consideration, and we have done a lot of experience. First of all, we've brought in experts in the field as consultants. I honestly did not realize the complexity of this situation. In saltwater, you're worried about, obviously, about corrosion, and of course, when you're generating electricity in in seawater. You know, what could go wrong with that, right? So there's a baked into the design are all the protections that we need. Isolating dissimilar metals as an example, coatings where appropriate, and then sacrificial anodes on our devices, which prevent the structures themselves from being corroded. Salt water is a tough environment, so coatings on the system, on the components, obviously is important. Salt water, fresh water also obviously can be corrosive, so it's a little different, but very similar techniques. So the answer is early on, bringing in experts, corrosion experts, and designing that into the system. And so far, we've not had any issues that were not anticipated.
Great. A reminder, we're coming towards the end of our time, so if anyone has any outstanding questions, now's a great time to ask them. Chris, without getting too speculative, kind of what does the next year and 5 years look like for ORPC? And do you see, what do you see as potential next steps or exits for investors?
Yep. The next year is going to be very exciting. We're going to be putting our first commercial unit in Igiugig next year. We're going to add a second unit, and we're going to be addressing their microgrid issues. So we'll be putting in the microgrid electronics and energy storage, and they will no longer need their diesel units. So that's a big step that we're going to be going through the next year or so. At the same time, we're going to be completing the commercial design of our TiGen system, and hopefully about a year from now, we'll be putting the first, we call it TiGen 4, in the water. It will be done here in Maine, and that will be our first commercial tidal product. At the same time, we are really pivoting now to much more of a marketing and sales effort, and we anticipate within a year we will have commitments for those first sales. So it'll be very exciting. Within 3 years, we will be a profitable company. Within 5 years, we will be a very profitable company. And so there's at least 3 exit scenarios of potential that we see. One would be acquisition or merger with a large multinational company, which would give us much more international reach, give us more breadth and depth. That would be a great way to go. It could be that a private equity firm buys us and provides us with the significant financial resources we need to actually develop all those capabilities on our own, which certainly is a way to go. And then the third obvious one would be an IPO. If you look 5 to 7 years out, our revenues will be exceeding $100 million a year. I mean, we'll be very profitable. We'll be on a steep curve, and everything indicates that it would be an ideal time for an IPO.
Well, great. And so last chance, if there's any questions, please let us know. Otherwise, Chris, thanks for being here. Is there anything else you'd like the attendees to know about ORPC before we finish?
Yeah, just quickly, I think one of the great stories about our technology is the environmental side of it. We have done 11 different in-water deployments. We have extensively monitored all of them. And we have never had a fish mortality or an injury. And in fact, the regulatory agencies have agreed with us that there are no known adverse environmental impacts from our power systems. We think that's a huge advantage and will be even more important as we go on. And the second thing I wanted to mention is our involvement in transforming these microgrids in remote communities actually has, as we see it now, big application in the mainland, as they say, the mainland grid, the U.S. grid, because increasingly people are looking at kind of breaking up this huge grid into smaller kind of microgrids that feed off each other, play well together. So our experience in microgrids is actually bringing us into a whole new market that we could not have anticipated even 2 years ago.
Well, great. So thanks everyone for attending. We appreciate your time. If anyone has questions about Netcapital, they're welcome to reach out to me. if you have questions, or looks like we might have had one additional question. Oh, one more question. Snuck in under the deadline. Chris, can you talk about if you have any competitors, and if so, kind of how you're differentiated?
Yeah, sure. Yeah, that's a great question. We do have competitors, obviously. Almost all of them are in Europe. Europe put incentives in place years before there were any in place here in the U.S. So there's an industry that's grown there. It's more mature there. But the industry breaks down into 2 or 3 different ways. Most people that are in this business are in the business just to sell units. They don't do the project development. They don't do the community outreach, which has become really a hallmark of excellence for us. So that's a big difference. We recognized early on that when you're developing a new product, you have to bring the customers along with you, so there's not a gap. I mean, it's not like you can just one day put a shingle out and say, I'm in the business, and people are going to come. You have to develop those early customers, and we have done that. The second is we have chosen a different market. We've looked at smaller projects, community power, and in currents that are less robust than other people. So there are people that are looking at only the strongest currents in the world, and there's maybe a dozen places around the world where they exist, and they're very strong. And yes, there is more energy in those, but we have optimized around a much lower current speed, which means our technology has applicability in every region of the world. And we're looking at initially smaller projects and building into bigger projects rather than starting out with the mega projects. And that really was because we believe in a measured approach to risk. And I can tell you that has paid off over the years.
Great. Well, I don't see any more questions. So at this point, again, thanks everyone for attending. If you have questions about Netcapital, you're welcome to reach out to me. This will be recorded and, or this has been recorded, and we'll post it on ORPC's offering page. If anyone has additional questions for ORPC, there's a discussion board on their offering page. Chris, thanks for being here.
Well, thank you, and I hope all of you will become part of the ownership of ORPC. We welcome you all.
Thank you, everybody.